G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Michael Dennehy from Collins SBA based in beautiful Hobart, Australia, here with me. Thanks for your time today, Michael.
My pleasure, mate.
Let's start with how we know each other. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we met through the Business Blind Spots group that we're in at the moment. Is that the first time we met?
I think it was actually by Rob Cameron. Rob, who I work with at Collins SBA, introduced us probably nearly a couple of years ago now, which sort of led to Business Blind Spots and obviously different interactions in between.
Yeah, many beers over our monthly meetups here at Hobart, business owners.
Commonality.
Yeah, so Business Blind Spots, the group we're in, so there's 12 or 13 different businesses in that group, different sectors they service, professionals, and we write a lot of content and articles out there on LinkedIn and Facebook and our soon-to-be launched website. So it's great, and we were able to help some business owners around Tasmania with that advice and refer good professionals on to other businesses.
Yeah, it's been good.
Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
So I'm with Collins SBA, but I'll just go back on my sort of business journey. So that started out in 1996 when a former partner of mine, Danny Rands, and I started the BDO office in Hobart. We left a business called Horworth, who I worked with Danny as his manager. We were just going in different directions as far as approach and planning, and came to me one day and said, how about we do this by ourselves, which I jumped at the opportunity. He offered me 10% with no ingoing, and away we went from there, and we were pretty successful, and so much so KPMG approached us in 2000 and we merged our business with them 1st of July 2000 when GST started. And unfortunately that didn't quite work out. More around our client base didn't suit KPMG, unfortunately, and we left in late 2002, and Danny and I set up the PKF office in Hobart to operate.
That's Panel Kerr Foster. They're one of the second-tier accounting firms here. They're international?
Yes.
And the first firm that you jumped from, BDO, they're also a big second-tier accounting firm, aren't they?
Correct. And they both still exist in Hobart. And from there, Danny and I started to develop different philosophies, and I guess our relationship just grew apart in an amicable sense. And I got an opportunity to join a business called Capital 3 back in 2007 or thereabouts. And that was a business that had different service offerings, and my contribution was to start the accounting and tax of the business. We had consulting, we had financial planning, we had finance broking. That was through, going back in the days, through the Wizard franchises.
And sorry, you were a business owner in this, weren't you?
Correct, yeah. And we even had marketing and branding, who Raz Haroon, who's part of Business Blind Spots you mentioned before, was part of that when I first met Raz, who's got Glue Advertising now. So that was back in 2007. Unfortunately, we were highly leveraged and the GFC hit, and in the end we all went our separate ways. I maintained Capital 3 accounting, so I ran that by myself for probably 4 or 5 years. In 2013, when I joined with Collins SBA, and that was principally around, 1, for me, succession planning, 2, allowing me to do the business advisory work that I now do full time.
Is it true? I think Rob told me that, or you may have told me that when you merged in with Collins, you said to Jono and Andrew on one condition, and that's I'm not doing tax anymore or accounting.
Correct. That's it.
You've got a real passion for the advisory side of things.
Yes, and I started to build that from Capital 3, and I got to, a point where I couldn't do both. And as you say, that was my passion and still is. I love it. So in Collins SBA, that's what I do along with Rob Cameron.
Yeah, great. And do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of your own businesses in there you've owned across those, 25 years? Was it 96 you started?
That's right, yeah. So back 96 when Danny and I started, it was Danny, I, and I think 3 others. And I guess we grew. I mean, obviously in the iterations when I joined KPMG, we obviously had a lot more employees through that time. And when we came back out, we probably had 8 or 10.
Yeah, because KPMG is one of the top 4 accounting firms in the world.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And one of the larger ones in Tassie. And today we're Collins SBA, we've got about 35 full-time equivalents. So.
Yep. And what was the top FTE you got to in one of your businesses?
Well, if it's just taking out the Capital 3, we would have had 20 to 25 across all the businesses.
Fantastic. Anything else on key numbers, mate, you want to share?
I guess because of my journey, if you like, and the different iterations, it sort of fluctuated depending on where I was. But I guess from a growth perspective, And I certainly had aspirations to grow around revenue, profit and people, obviously. But there were some ups and downs depending on where I was. But today as a business at Collins SBA, we've got 35 full-time equivalents, and revenue going back is probably eightfold from back in 96.
Well done. It's great. When was the moment you felt like you'd succeeded?
It's I've never ever really thought about success personally. I think moving to Collins SBA was probably when I sort of sat back and go, well, that's now a part of my succession, but more so giving me the ability to do the business advisory, strategic planning, business coaching. I think that was really satisfying. So I guess that's probably when I felt that was a measure of success.
And what does success look like to you?
It's when it relates to my clients. So it's when I work with business owners to help them achieve their goals and objectives and basically help them with achieving their financial freedom ultimately, but also getting the balance right in their life so they're just not tied into their business every day.
Yeah, very important, and always a struggle for me in particular. But yeah, it's great that you're cognizant of that when you're working with businesses or business owners. Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Very clear on your target market. I think particularly when businesses start out, they try to be everything to everybody.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that's part of the learning curve. And I guess working with fast-growing businesses, that's one of the things we certainly focus on in our early days and try to help business owners refine and be very clear on what their target market is, so they're just more efficient and effective with everything they do, including their marketing, obviously.
And how did you fund your two businesses? You mentioned one of them was highly leveraged with debt, which got you guys in a bit of trouble after the GFC. Any other funding methods you used?
I guess early days, it was no funding. We just grew, and I guess being a service-based business, we didn't need any capital items per se. Capital 3, as I said, we leveraged to buy businesses in different places around our different franchises. And then I guess Collins SBA, as far as growth and acquisitions, there's some debt funding associated with that as well.
If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I think the change would be I'd be more focused on scaling and how to scale the business, and also marketing, and be very strategic in marketing and making sure you have got return on investment being measured as well in that context.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Yes, I probably had a few when I sort of reflect on that question. One was KPMG, without going into the detail. Moving from BDO cost us to sort of rip up an infrastructure, so to speak, and I was going in there for the rest of my working days and didn't last long, so that was very stressful, as well as the Capital 3 experience with the GFC and being highly geared. That was also very stressful, and in general it tends to be relating to people and partners not being on the same page, so it's sort of important for any of the people in the business to be aligned and on the same page as far as where the business is going.
Yeah, absolutely. What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
Yes, I reflect on this. I think it's sales, because I think, like a lot of people, selling their services or product doesn't come naturally. So I think one, being confident in what you sell and passionate about it, and understanding the value of what you provide to your customers and clients. So I've been fortunate to see or been through sales training over a number of years, and with seeing different approaches that has definitely helped me. But I think underlying it is just confidence in what you provide your customers and focusing on the value, I think helps in a sales process.
And is there any sales training that you've done that really rank high there for the audience to go and look up?
Yeah, a guy called Jack Daly. He's an American sales guru. I've seen him actually 3 or 4 times. And he's a very motivating bloke, and he's probably mid-70s now. And his approach is all about systems. It's systems, processes with respect to sales. So everybody follows a process. You can have your own little nuances to it, but in his sort of journey, and he's run big businesses over the years, it's all about process and having a sales playbook, essentially. So I guess I've learned a bit off Jack over the years, and certainly is part of my coaching with respect to my clients. Like I say, he's a very motivating, inspirational sort of sales coach.
What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
I think going back in the early days, it's the wearing too many hats, basically, and that happens when you start businesses and not having the ability or the mindset to delegate.
I've done that.
Yeah, I think we've all done that. It's probably part of the journey. And again, that's part of growing a business, is being able to delegate and get the right people in the right roles.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
It's actually the thrill of the chase. I love being around people and meeting new people, and thrill of, I guess, getting new client and helping them through their journey. That sort of gets me up out of bed every morning. And then, as I say, being able to be with business owners on their journey and help them achieve their goals.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
I think it's around that delegation piece. So it comes back to getting the right people, the right roles, making sure they're accountable. And the accountability piece is sometimes challenging for people, and I sort of went through that. But if you can get those three aspects in place, then the ability to delegate is a lot easier. And it's underpinned by trust at the end of the day, being able to have trust around your people and vice versa.
What is the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Spending time working on the business, and I guess that's part of my coaching role, is to keep business owners accountable to working on the business, which comes down to one, discipline around spending that time on a weekly, on a regular basis, and in a place and a time which works best for the business owner. But from experience, if people have got that mindset and that focus and the discipline, then the rest does take care of itself as far as the growth aspects.
Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yeah, well, I guess over the years when I've been in a position to employ, so it's going back in the BDO, PKF, Capital 3 days, then I wouldn't go through psychometric testing or anything like that, which wasn't probably around much those days, but it'd be much getting to understand the individual. And I think I look at their experience in a team environment, but sport or otherwise, and understanding their values. And sometimes it comes down to gut feel. And I used to have a process where I'd take them out for lunch or a few beers and just get them in a social setting, because I think that's when you get a better sense of the individual. Because in a formalised interview, people can just go through a process and you don't actually understand or get a good feel for them. So I think that's from a hiring perspective. And then through the journey, if you like, within a business, I think it's obviously communications and expectations, which is like any relationship, but personal, business, sport, they're the real critical things.
What are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Well, I think there's a number of aspects with this. I think it starts out with planning. So being clear on what you want to achieve over a period of time and building a strategy to get there. There's also making sure you got the right people in the right roles and accountable, as I said before. You've got systems and processes in place, and making sure you got the appropriate data to actually measure how you're tracking.
I love that adage, what can be measured can be managed.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no truer word. So that's certainly part of the work I do with clients, making sure we embed the appropriate data. And I think that's the key. It's the key drivers of a business. So making sure we're clear on those and measuring them. And there's no point measuring stuff that doesn't really matter, right? So, and I think the other bits then is the communication structure around that. So making sure there's appropriate meetings, not just for talk's sake, but just make sure there's some structure around communication.
Tell the audience how you've handled balance.
Probably didn't handle that very well in the early days. My wife would attest to that, but I'm probably gone to the other extreme now. I think it comes down to one, discipline. I mean, I learnt many years ago that you diarise your personal time in your diary. That's a starting point. You still got to need the discipline to stick to it. But I always have treated time to go to the gym or my bike riding, which is my couple of passions, as a client. And it'd be only by exceptions that you sort of don't do that, because as you and I appreciate in working with businesses, it's all very easy to sort of put that aside, and that comes back to that discipline piece.
Yeah, but you get it back in spades. You've got more energy, you're more creative. Yeah, it's hard to do. I mean, I still struggle with it because I love what I do, but you've got to have those structures. And as you said, the discipline to do it.
Absolutely. I think, and too, if you fit in body and mind, then I think the ability to lead people is so much more enhanced as well.
Yeah, definitely. How much professional development have you invested in yourself over time?
Yeah, a fair bit. I guess of more recent times, as pre-COVID, I was going 2 or 3 events on the mainland, and typically run by the growth faculty, which bring many good speakers to Australia. Been fortunate to see Simon Sinek, Jim Collins, Patrick Lencioni, some, I guess, great business people that use a lot of their philosophies in what I do. But in more recent times, it's more like podcasts, like a great podcast like yours, and other books. I don't love reading. I do read business books again, that for me is important. And virtual presentations are more the events that you go to these days.
Have you had mentors or coaches along the way?
Yes, I had a guy called Phil Richardson who used to work for Action Coaches. So this is back when I had started the Capital 3 accounting by myself, and identified it was lonely. I had no partners to sort of talk to. So I can't remember how I came across Phil. I actually played cricket with Phil 35 years ago. Phil lives in Melbourne, but So anyway, I appointed Phil for 12 months, and it was the best thing I've ever done, I'd say, if I go back over my business journey.
Because he challenged your thinking and ego, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And just a sounding board. And it was more the planning piece. And so we worked together for 12 months. And like I said, that was, I think, a real catalyst for moving forward. And it was, as I said, probably one of the best things I've ever done in running my own business. As far as mentors, I've had little or none formally, but talked to lots of people. I've had a guy more recently, last 3 or 4 years, where, again, very informally, we catch up now, and someone I can lean on if ever need to. But I think in general, it's very important for business owners to have coaches and mentors along the way. And I think if you're going to want to grow and succeed, it's nearly one of the key attributes.
No, I totally agree. I wish I had any mentor really at the start. It would have saved me a shit ton of mistakes and money.
Yeah.
And you have a board of directors at the moment. How often do you meet, and do you have a chair on that board?
Yes, Collins SBA, we've got 3 directors who are all shareholders, and of those, a managing director. We actually appointed a chair for the first time back in February. So that was a real big step for a business like ours. But we've got reasonably aggressive growth aspirations, and we felt that was appropriate to now take our next step, having a chair board, someone external, where there's a bit more accountability to the board and across the business.
Yeah, as you know, I sit on 5 boards, chair 3 of those, which I really revel and love that role. But yeah, it's having someone independent, because they can stand in the forest and they can actually see the trees, whereas those people working in the business and so consume particularly fast growth, they miss some obvious things.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Just before we start the final 5 questions, so now I'm about to ask that question on exit. So it'd be great. Any sage advice you can give? So you're one of the few that we've had on that's actually exited a business, and you've exited 2. So do you have any advice for our audience around that? Those that might be thinking of exiting now or at some point?
Yes, well, I guess that's sort of part of succession planning, which I do. And I think it's making sure, one, you've got an understanding of what the business is worth, but also 2, equally understanding whether there's any upside. And I guess if you need to exit quickly, then that obviously restricts any upside. But it's like when you put a house on the market, making sure it's in order to sell, and making sure, if you can, to maximise the financial outcome. And I guess being clear too on what those outcomes are that aren't necessarily financial. So, for example, for me, when I joined Collins SBA, it was as much around what I was going to do in my role post that. And I think it's a very important thing to consider, because I've seen too many people exit their business and not be clear on what's next, and making sure you've still got a purpose. And that's been a purpose in business or a purpose in life, because unfortunately, as I've actually seen and aware of people in business that have had mental health issues as a result of not being clear on having a purpose post-exit.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. I've heard stories, not people so much, they may have been business owners, but those with careers in the 80s. So work was such a big part of their identity that for months, if not years, they'd still have to put the suit on, drive around the block, come home, and then get in their casual gear. It was just something that was so ingrained in them. And
everyone's different, but I think that's sort of leading into an exit, having sometimes those hobbies or whatever it looks like. But when the flip side, I know people that exit their business, they've planned what they're going to do. So, they're very busy and they've got purpose. So I think that's probably one of the key things, actually, is other than the financial outcomes for people exiting, it's really being clear on what's next and have that purpose.
I had my dad on the podcast. As I think I've mentioned, he's the only one that wouldn't let me swear because he wanted the grandkids to hear it. But I think Dad had suffered from that a little bit, in the sense that when he retired, air quotes, soon after, he just started buying small businesses to turn them around and grow them up. That was kind of his hobby until he found other passions, like he's right into cycling now. He has been for 10 or 15 years, thanks to my younger brother getting into that sport.
Yep, that's good.
Right, Mike, I wanted our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Being consistent and having discipline. So consistency around everything you do within the business, from an internal and from a customer perspective, and then the discipline around what you do in the business. And that's just not for the owner, but for everybody. So it's driving that discipline, which part of it's systems and processes through the business. Not easy, but that can pay significant dividends.
On consistency, I'll read out one of my favorite quotes, which I have a picture frame here on my desk. The secret of success is constancy of purpose. Benjamin Disraeli, who was one of the prime ministers of Britain.
Yep, that's spot on.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
I've actually got a few, and extract from their approaches and philosophies. And there's a business called Traction. Can't remember the author, Blue Ocean Strategy, Patrick Lencioni, and Jim Collins' Good to Great, and the other books. Probably the four really good ones that I read regularly, business books, but they tend to be the ones that have helped me in the work I do with business owners. But like anything, you're always picking up bits and pieces from anything you read and the podcast and listen.
Yeah, I haven't read Blue Ocean Strategy yet, but it's on my list. I've heard that is a great book.
Yeah.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Well, obviously yours, mate. You regularly listen to yours. I actually love Mark Bouris as well.
He almost swears more than me.
I reckon he does. He's not scared of the F-bomb. Another good one is How I Built This with Guy Raz. He's an American guy, but he interviews some good people around business growth. And Patrick Lencioni's got a good podcast as well.
I know you're an avid listener of this podcast, and I think you were the one that asked me to slow down because when I went to 2 episodes a week, you couldn't keep up.
Yeah, you can only do so much, right?
Yeah. The one tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
I think it's not necessarily a tool, but I think coming back to a coach and a mentor and or both, I think that's really, really critical. And like any in sport or in business, a coach is so important. There's not many sports people that don't have a coach. So I just find it's interesting in business, the complete opposite. So it's obviously finding the right person or persons, but it can make a significant difference.
Finally, my favourite question, what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Well, I'm going to sort of recite sort of what I talk to my clients about. So essentially it's having a plan, a strategy, sort of trying to be clear on what you want to achieve and by when. Like I say, having coaches and mentors, being focused, employing the right people and getting them the right roles. So you can delegate, because I think that's, again, one of the challenges is delegation, and that really is underpinned by trust. So I guess it comes back to having the right people. And process and systems and data, like I said. So that's sort of the key aspects that I approach the businesses that I work with. So again, if I was going to go back to day one and knowing what I know now, that certainly would be my approach.
Back to people, that reminds me of one of my favourite quotes, just smacked me in the face when I read Good to Great by Jim Collins, where he says, people aren't your greatest asset, the right people are. Get the right people on the bus, wrong people off. And I find this last point really important, the right people in the right roles.
No, it's never a true word. And it's interesting, like a lot of this stuff is not easy, right? So, and I guess that's why a lot of businesses owners don't do it. And that's where that structure and discipline is so important, and someone to support them, like a coach or a mentor or both.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for your time today, mate. I think the audience get a lot of value out of what you've shared with us and your journey owning 2 of your own businesses and working for some big and medium-sized firms. So well done on the growth, and really appreciate your time.
No, my pleasure, mate. And look forward to doing more stuff and working with you going forward.
Great. Thanks.
Cheers, mate.
We're getting some great iTunes reviews. For those listening, please pop over to your podcast app and leave us a review.